Good morning. Thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. It's Monday, February 10th, 2020, and today I've got an absolutely massive nullification movement news update for you. I'm covering bills in states to deal with things like civil asset forfeiture, the FDA, violations of your natural right to keep and bear arms, facial recognition surveillance, unconstitutional prohibition, the Defend the Guard Act, so much more. I don't know. I really wanted to cover a lot more, but as I was going through my notes and the bills that we're watching, I was going through this a couple hours ago this morning, and there's just way too much to cover. So I'm trying to give you guys the highlights and also some ideas of what you can do in your own state if you see me covering a bill on an issue that's important to you, but it's elsewhere. Anyways, before getting to all that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. We've got a bunch of video and audio platforms. We do a live stream through DLive, Twitch, Periscope, Facebook, and YouTube. We have archived video versions also at Brighteon.com, BitTube.tv, and BitShoot.com. And then we have the podcast audio-only edition on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, and elsewhere. You can find all the archives, all the platforms that we're on, show notes, links that I mentioned, action items, ways to support the organization here at TAC. Find that all over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. I hope you guys all had an awesome weekend. I had a really busy one. Got a lot of things going on this time of year, obviously, but then I also had a little time. My brother was in from out of town, so I got to spend a little time with him as well. That was pretty cool. I hope you guys enjoyed your weekend. Your week is off to a great start. Let's say hello to everybody out in the live chat. Just going to blast through saying hi to a few people. Essential Freedom, Josh Irwin, Tobor, Heather Rossi, Patricia Dance, Andrew Nappy, Matt, Michael Bogus, Pete Hodgkins, Dan Reed, Danny Smith, Tyler B. I may have mentioned you, but you get a bonus one if I had already. Pete Hodgkins, Richard Kramer, and everybody else. Whatever platform you happen to be on, whether you're watching live or in the archive, you're listening only, I really appreciate the feedback, the input, the questions, the comments, suggestions. If you've got ideas for other shows, feel free to email me, team@10thamendmentcenter.com. Again, team@10thamendmentcenter.com. I read everything. I don't get a chance to reply to everything, but I do appreciate all the insight as well. And also want to say hi to Suzanne Sperry and Eric Perry as well. Anyways, let's get right to this. I want to first start out with this quote from Thomas Jefferson that I've cited a few times. This is really the foundation for a lot of the work that we do here. There's a lot of quotes that we can use as a foundation, but this is a really good one when it comes to strategy to defeat, to undermine, resist, and nullify acts from the most powerful government the world has ever seen. The most expensive, the largest reach, the U.S. federal government, that is. Well, it used to be federal. Let's call it the central government these days. And here from a letter that Jefferson wrote to Reverend Charles Clay on January 27th, 1790, he was very clear when he said, "The ground of liberty is to be gained by inches, that we must be contented to secure what we can from time to time and eternally press forward for what is yet to get." And we know that getting from point A to point B, from where things are now to a state of liberty, and point B really should be point Z or double Z, way down the line, because it's nowhere close to it. We know that getting there in one step is impossible, although some people really believe that there's a silver bullet. I think they're mostly snake oil salesmen. There isn't. So our approach is what Jefferson advised and many other founders and revolutionaries of the time, and that is scrape back and take back as much as you can at every moment that you're able to, but also hold the vision of the final goal in mind. Because if you're okay with just partial steps forward and you're okay with that and that's all you ever want to do, you really aren't part of the solution. Maybe you're helpful as we work on the path further towards liberty, but we really want to take each step and build on it. We want to brick by brick create a foundation. Jeff Deist at the Mises Supporter Summit last fall in Los Angeles, he gave a presentation at a dinner, and that's how he put it. He said, brick by brick, you got to build this foundation for liberty. And it's not something that's going to happen immediately, but each person at a time, each effort, each instance at a time, we're going to take what we can and grow from there. But that's me rambling. Let's talk about some of the legislation that we're monitoring. And just a quick note, if you live in any of the states that I'm referencing and you support the bill that I'm talking about, what you want to do is make phone calls. Phone calls are far more effective than emails, but emails can still be helpful on a state level. Make phone calls to your state representative and state senator and ask them to co-sponsor and support the bill in question. Even if you think that they're a terrible person, and most of them are, to be honest with you, still call them. Be firm but professional. Don't be a jerk, because that does really, really poorly. Being a jerk does not work when you do these things. In fact, sometimes you'll find legislators who are on board with doing something, and when a lot of people call and act like total jerks, they end up voting against it just to prove a point. And that also goes to show you how politicians think about things. Anyway, so first of all, I want to start out with asset forfeiture. Now, if you're not in a state that I mentioned, you can use this as ideas. And in fact, you can take the legislation. I'll include links to these in the show notes at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. And you can take a link to a bill, like, for example, this one in Alabama, House Bill 120, which was just filed last week on February 4th, to basically end civil asset forfeiture in the state. Now, if you don't live in Alabama and you live somewhere else where you still have civil asset forfeiture, that's most of the country, you could take this piece of legislation, click the link where it says, if you're watching on video, you can see this. In the report, it says Representative Andrew Sorrell, Republican from Muscle Shoals, filed House Bill 120, and then in parentheses it says HB 120. If you click that, it's in red. That's the color of our active links on our website. That'll take you to the bill. Then over on Legiscan or on the state legislative website, whatever link we happen to use in that report, you can just email that or send it over to your state representatives and state senators, say, please support this. And then follow up 2 days later. Hey, I sent you an email about an asset forfeiture bill. I want you to know that I support this, and I want to hear where you stand on it. And just keep doing that over and over. Be just pestering about it, but be nice. Be nice. Anyway, so this bill in Alabama, House Bill 120, would effectively end civil asset forfeiture in Alabama and replace it with a criminal forfeiture process. I think this is a huge step forward for the state should it pass. Under the proposed law, the state could not complete the forfeiture process without a criminal conviction in virtually all cases. Mind you, I want it to be in all cases, but if we're following Jefferson's advice, step by step, we will take each step and move the ball forward from there. Interestingly enough, this bill in Alabama also addresses a very dangerous federal asset forfeiture program called equitable sharing. And in states where they ban civil asset forfeiture on the state level, and they don't address the federal equitable sharing program, the asset forfeiture continues almost unabated, and in some situations, it's actually worse. And here from the report, law enforcement agencies can circumvent more strict state forfeiture laws by claiming cases are federal in nature. So they pull somebody over, there's a bunch of cash in the car, the state doesn't allow them to actually conduct civil asset forfeiture. So then they say, well, this is drug money. Well, let's call our federal partners over at the DEA, and we'll tell them we've got a potential federal case. Then if the federal agency says, yeah, we'll take that as a federal case, the locals then continue to work the case. They send the money to the federal government, and through the equitable sharing program, the feds keep about 20% to do nothing, and they send back 80% to the locals. So this is basically an end run that the federal government promotes and pushes on the states, an end run around restrictions on civil asset forfeiture, which is legalized government highway robbery. And in the report, it's noted, however, when states merely withdraw from participation, the federal directive loses its impact. If you don't participate in it and states can just opt out, then there is no federal equitable sharing program. So House Bill 120 in Alabama directly addresses this federal equitable sharing program, and it bans participation in it in about 80 to 90% of situations. I want it to be 100, but this is way better than 0. So this is a very positive step forward should it pass. I also want to mention a number of other bills that we're watching pretty closely. In Kentucky, House Bill 322, this only addresses the state-level asset forfeiture program. That's up in the House Judiciary Committee, and we expect it to have a hearing sometime soon, potentially a vote. So it was just posted in committee over the last week. In Hawaii, House Bill 2069 is not yet scheduled for a hearing, but that one also addresses just the state level. That's a first step forward. In Arizona, they've already addressed the federal program, and there are now 2 bills in the state to address the state level program. So they basically have opted out of a vast majority of the federal equitable sharing program. Now 2 bills, one from Representative Bob Thorpe. This is House Bill 2149, and then also, I'm not sure who the other one filed by is, House Bill 2032. So we'll be monitoring those pretty closely. And in New Hampshire, a final committee hearing and vote will be happening on HB 1192. They've already addressed the state level program with law in the state to do a pretty good job on it. Not perfect yet, but this one would opt the state out of about 80 to 90% of the federal program. That's up for a hearing, House Bill 1192. On March 3rd. Next up, I want to talk about the FDA and food prohibition because the federal government, I think I'm jumping ahead to gun control. Let's do it. Okay, let's go right to gun control, the right to keep and bear arms. There's another bill from Alabama, House Bill 123, also from Representative Andrew Sorrell, would declare that federal red flag laws or extreme risk protection orders are void and of no effect in the state of Alabama. And I noted in this report that literally just declaring them void and no effect, it's nice, but it doesn't actually change how they would be enforced. Like if they just passed a resolution, that's positive and they worked on it like that, but the representative here added some teeth to the legislation. It would, quote, prohibit any agency or any political subdivision of the state from accepting any federal grants because we know the DOJ really wants to, instead of necessarily making it immediately a federal program, right now what they're trying to do is they're trying to use federal funding to push the states into kind of a pre-crime approach on things. And they want to push the states through funding to enact these red flag laws. So this would prohibit the state from accepting any federal grants to implement any federal statute, rule, executive order, federal or state judicial order, or judicial findings that would have the effect of forcing an extreme risk protection order against or upon a citizen of Alabama. And it would also make it a Class D felony offense for any individual, including a law enforcement order, to enforce a federal extreme risk protection order. So this is a really solid bill on a narrow issue, but an important one, because every step towards more gun control is bad. So even though this is narrow and we'd like to see them cover much more, this certainly would set a good foundation in Alabama. We also have a very similar bill to deal with just red flag laws in Kansas, the Kansas Anti-Red Flag Act, House Bill 2425 and SB 245. Next up, I want to talk about the Missouri Second Amendment Preservation Act. You guys probably have heard me talk about this. This would basically ban the use of state or local manpower or resources, any material support or resources for the enforcement of virtually any federal gun control, past, present, or future. It's very broad, and it is a very huge first step forward to nullifying all that federal gun control in practice and effect. There's 2 bills on the House side. It's House Bill 1637. That is now up to, I think, 48 co-sponsors. We probably need to get it closer to 80. If you live in Missouri, call your state representative and ask them to co-sponsor House Bill 1637. Because my impression of what's going on is that the supposed gun rights supporting Speaker of the House there is holding back on even assigning this bill to a committee until he sees that there are enough co-sponsors to warrant its assignment. I've seen plenty of other bills in Missouri start moving forward and going through the committee process already, so I think this tells us that we don't necessarily have a friendly speaker in Missouri on this issue, but with a lot of grassroots pressure, we might see things move forward. On the Senate side, though, we actually put out an action alert this last week for Senate Bill 588. This is the Senate bill from Eric Burleson. It's the same legislation. And that was actually scheduled for a committee hearing, its first committee hearing last week, but I guess there was a snowstorm, so the entire hearing was canceled, and they only scheduled those in that particular committee. I think it's the Transportation, Infrastructure, and Public Safety Committee. They only schedule those once a week, so hopefully we can get that rescheduled. I know there's a lot of people on the ground in Missouri working to get Senator Doug Libla, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. If not, I apologize, to reschedule Senate Bill 588 for a hearing in the Missouri Senate Transportation, Infrastructure, and Public Safety Committee. Once those bills get into hearings, they need two steps. They have a hearing to discuss it, hear if there's debate, opposition, and then there has to be a second hearing. I guess the committee chair, at least on the Senate side, can put these all in one hearing. There has to be two sessions, though. One is a regular session for debate, and then second is called an executive session where there's no more debate and they just have a vote. And each side, whether it's House or Senate, it has to pass by a majority vote to move forward in the process. The earlier this happens here in February, the better, because what they tend to do in Missouri, and we've watched this, there's a lot of legislation that we support that actually moves forward, that actually could do a lot of good things, but they play kind of a timer game. They run out the clock. They delay hearings. They delay meetings. They delay votes and executive sessions. And then when it gets passed along to the chamber floor, they have delays on votes, and then they issue amendments at the last minute. These are very, very, I guess they're smoke and mirrors tricks to really delay the passage of a piece of legislation. It's possible that'll happen again in Missouri this year, but things are moving a little bit earlier than we've seen in the past. So Senate Bill 588 and House Bill 1637 in Missouri. We're also watching very similar legislation in Oklahoma. That's House Bill 2781. West Virginia, House Bill 4168. Mississippi, a new one, Senate Bill 2238. And Wyoming, a new one that was just pre-filed this last week, House Bill 118. This is the Second Amendment Preservation Act. Next up, I also want to cover constitutional carry, another Alabama bill, Senate Bill 1. I covered this late last year. This is from Senator Gerald Allen. This, under current law, they allow residents 19 or older to apply for permits at the county level. Under the proposed new law from Senator Allen, anyone who is legally allowed to own a gun could carry it concealed without a state-issued license. I like this type of legislation, even though I hate the term constitutional carry because your rights don't come from the Constitution. You don't need, really, if we're talking about natural rights, the idea of having to get permission is bad. But this, I think, creates an environment a little bit more hostile to gun control, because the more people who can easily carry, open or concealed, whatever, or without a permit, the more likely that people will learn that the more people carry, the less dangerous it is for society. So I'm very much in support of constitutional carry legislation as a step forward. Senate Bill 1 in Alabama, and then in South Carolina, we're looking at House Bill 3456. Next up, I want to cover marijuana prohibition. If you, like me, understand that the Constitution does not authorize the federal government to prohibit a plant or a gun, you know that the right step forward is for states to continue defying Washington, D.C. on this unconstitutional prohibition on a plant. There are now 33 states that are doing this to varying degrees, from medical to recreational. The next up could be New Mexico. Senate Bill 115 would do a recreational legalization in that state. That passed out of its first committee by a 4-3 margin just at the end of January, and we'll be watching how it plays out in its next committee hearing. Also in New Hampshire, where they haven't legalized yet, there's always some opposition at the higher levels of government in New Hampshire to actually doing anything like this, but they've been pushing for a number of years, at least on the House side, and things definitely move forward there. And an interesting new approach, rather than creating this kind of environment where they legalize and create licenses and retail stores and all that, supporters of or opponents of marijuana prohibition are taking a different path. House Bill 1648 would legalize possession and home cultivation. Rather than creating a system of state-regulated stores, it's basically saying people, average people, could just grow it themselves. This is a plant. Treat it like tomatoes. Well, in some degree, this is a step towards that. This would legalize basically anyone without a license being able to have, possess, and grow up to 6 plants on their own property. And I think when you get down to it, if you're talking about a naturally occurring plant, the idea that people can grow that in their own yard is probably a really good idea. The federal government says this is illegal, and most states say this is illegal too because they really want to get their grubby hands on all the tax revenue. So I actually find this to be a really interesting approach. That passed out of the House Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee just a week or so ago by a 13-7 vote. So that will go up to the full House for a vote maybe in the next couple of weeks. I'm not sure. I did not see it on the schedule. A similar bill also passed out of a committee in Washington State. That's House Bill 1131. And then here in California, where I think this is kind of the granddaddy state when it comes to defying Washington, D.C.'s prohibition and taking steps to nullify it in practice and effect, they're starting to look at banking issues because the Federal Reserve is right now one of the most dangerous enforcement arms against or for the federal government when it comes to marijuana prohibition, because what they do is they block people from having transactions. So then it becomes mostly an all-cash business. And when you're talking about all-cash business in something like this, billions of dollars, that creates its own logistic and security problems. So for the last few years, we've seen efforts here in California to either create a kind of a state-based cannabis-only banking system, or this bill, AB 1525, which passed near the end of January out of the Assembly by a vote of 65-1, which is pretty impressive even here in California. This would basically just clarify that under state law, this is a small but important first step forward. Under state law, financial institutions in California are not doing anything wrong if they do business with a cannabis business. So that is a positive step forward. It passed out of the state assembly and goes to the state Senate next. It's a 2-year session, so we've got all the way till I think probably like August or September to see where that one goes. Next up, I want to talk about surveillance, facial recognition. It looks like I skipped my notes on raw milk, but let's see if I can get to that in just a moment here. Facial recognition surveillance in Washington State, House Bill 2856. This comes from a coalition of 3 Democrats. If passed into law, state and local government agencies would be prohibited from, quote, obtaining, retaining, requesting, accessing, or using any facial recognition technology or any information obtained from or by use of facial recognition technology. It passed out of committee just at the beginning of this month, so its first step has already moved forward and then has to go to, I believe, the Rules Committee before the full House can consider it. Furthermore, any information obtained from or by the use of facial recognition would be barred from being used as evidence in any trial or other proceeding before a court or other authority subject to the jurisdiction of Washington State. We know that even if a state were to ban the use of any surveillance technology, whether it's facial recognition, automated license plate reader technology, drone surveillance, cell site simulators, or stingrays, if a state does that, the federal government, through information sharing environment and fusion centers, will collect that same kind of data from other states or from their own agencies and try to share it with state and local law enforcement. So this is actually a really intelligent piece of legislative writing here, because they're literally banning the stuff from being used even if they're not collecting it. It's kind of like opting out of the federal equitable sharing program. They're basically opting out of receiving any of this. Now, the problem with this piece of legislation, here's the caveat. It is a 3-year moratorium. Instead of, and I've talked about this before, this happened here in California, where there was initially a piece of legislation that was introduced to fully ban police body cams from using facial recognition or any other biometric surveillance. And because the people who are supporting this legislation are primarily focusing on race issues, and I acknowledge that facial recognition does really good with matching my face, Caucasian male, and it does really poorly with figuring out who a black male is, African Americans, and it misnames them and misidentifies them really often, a pretty significant percentage. I think the number was like 35% of the time. And in and of itself, that certainly is problematic. But our problem with this is not the fact that it just gets one race screwed up more than another. The problem is that it is a warrantless mass surveillance tool. And over time, if you take the approach that your only concern is the racial issue, eventually the technology is going to improve and there won't be a racial concern anymore, and everyone will be treated equally by mass warrantless surveillance. And that's not okay either. So we've got 3 years in Washington state, should this pass, to make the case that warrantless facial recognition mass surveillance is unconstitutional, whether it's on the state or the federal level. So it's a positive step forward, and I think we can support that House Bill 2856, but we have to be aware that there is more that needs to be done. A very similar bill has just been filed in New York State. This is Senate Bill 7572 from Senator Brad Hoylman. There is no restriction on the amount of time. This is just a complete ban should it pass. The legislation would ban state and local police in New York from acquiring, possessing, accessing, installing, activating, or using any biometric surveillance system or any biometric information or surveillance information derived from the use of a biometric surveillance system by any other entity. Under the proposed law, this is from Mike Meharry, biometric surveillance includes facial recognition technology, along with automated systems that can identify an individual through their voice, their gait, retina scans, or other biological data. Things like DNA, for example. So this is a very positive piece of legislation. I'm not sure where it's going to go. I believe Hoylman is well known and respected in the kind of the power elite. So it's interesting that this guy is actually filing this piece of legislation. We'll see where it goes. Senate Bill 7572 in New York. And surprisingly, another pro-privacy bill filed in New York. We see this happen a lot. Actually, a lot of really good legislation is filed in New York State, here in California as well. Very little of it goes forward, but we definitely want to make people aware of it. Here's Assembly Bill 2620 from Assemblymember Jeffrey Dinowitz. It would help block the use of cell site simulators known as stingrays. Again, from Mike Meharry, he writes, these devices essentially spoof cell phone towers, tricking any device within range into connecting to the stingray instead of the tower, allowing law enforcement to sweep up communications content, as well as locate and track the person in possession of a specific phone or other electronic device. So they would have to get a warrant based on probable cause, which is how it should be now if Assembly Bill 2620 passes. That's how it should be. It's not happening, so this would be a new directive to do that, and I think would be very positive. There's a similar bill up for a hearing in Maryland. House Bill 499 is up for a committee hearing in the House Judiciary. It looks like tomorrow, February 11th. So if you live in Maryland, House Bill 499, you definitely want to get on the horn and support that bill as well. Let me see if I can pull up the raw milk bill that I wanted to cover here. Bear with me just a moment, as you guys are probably like, what is he doing clicking around here? There's like 3 or 4 bills. One of them was from Missouri. We've got a bunch of, I've noticed a lot of legislation this year to address raw milk prohibition. It's fascinating because the federal government not only claims the power to ban the interstate, crossing state lines, the sale, transportation of unpasteurized milk. They also claim the power to do the same within the state. Check this out. This was what the FDA had to say. It is within HHS's authority to institute an intrastate ban on unpasteurized milk as well. So they want to do this, and the way to actually defeat that is for more states to literally just say, we don't care, we're going to legalize it like they do in Cal. I can literally walk 2.5 blocks down the street, and I can go to my local market, Grow Market. That's an advertisement, I guess, if you live in the area. It wasn't meant to be, not paid, not a paid sponsorship. I go to my local market, and I can pick out raw milk, raw kefir, raw cheese, raw all kinds of stuff. I don't need a permission slip. I don't need an ID. I don't need a license. Maybe the grocer has to have something special, or the farmer has to have something special. But in a lot of red states and a lot of other states around the country, the stuff is still banned. So Missouri, House Bill 1335, would legalize retail sales of raw milk or cream produced in Missouri at grocery stores, restaurants, soda fountains, or similar establishments. That passed on January 29th out of its first committee, the House Agricultural Policy Committee. They don't give vote totals. They just give it a do pass recommendation. They're basically saying the recommendation of the House committee that specializes in this issue says the full House should pass it. So now it has to go to a House Rules Committee. This is basically for scheduling for the House floor. So House Bill 1335 would move Missouri forward on this unconstitutional FDA prohibition. Now, you don't have to like raw milk. You don't have to even want it, but it should not be up to government who can make that decision at all. So House Bill 1335, a similar bill in Utah actually went really far, but the clock was run out near the end of the session. So a sponsor, I can't remember her name, refiled the bill this year, House Bill 134. And that passed out of committee just on Friday. I believe Mike Meharry is working up a report on that either today or tomorrow. And then in Massachusetts, we had a committee, a joint committee, pass a bill to expand the raw milk market there. And then in Kansas, it's kind of a weird combination of what's going on there. There's the same committee filed two totally opposite bills. So I don't really understand. This is a little weird. They have one bill that says any unpasteurized milk is totally illegal. And then the same committee, it wasn't filed by an individual, it was filed as a joint action of that particular committee. They filed another bill, I think it was House Bill 300. Let me see if I can pull this up here real quick. Senate Bill 308. This is the Senate Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee. So under current law, they allow on-farm sales. This would expand this and allow people to advertise their products and sell elsewhere as well. So this is a small expansion of the raw milk market, Senate Bill 308, but they also filed another bill to ban what's already currently allowed. So that's really weird. We're definitely kind of watching to see what's going on in Kansas. It might be some smoke and mirrors to add some more prohibition to things. So we'll give you an update when we're able to. And then the last thing I want to cover today is the Defend the Guard Act, something I've covered here pretty regularly. The latest is in Wyoming. Representative Tyler Lindholm, a representative from Crook, a politician from Crook. This guy seems to do some really good stuff on cryptocurrency, defend the guard. I believe he's done some things on the right to keep and bear arms as well. So Tyler, if you're watching, I don't know him, but we've seen him on Twitter. I think he's doing great work on this particular issue, and it's just... it's hard to resist mentioning that city name. Anyway, so Lindholm, along with a bipartisan coalition of 14 representatives. In Wyoming, there's not much bipartisanship, so it's interesting to see some of the more powerful Republicans get behind this bill, plus some of the leading Democrats. I think that says quite a lot. Usually, bipartisan means it's a two-party way of ripping you off, but this is actually rejecting unconstitutional war powers. They filed House Bill 98 on February 4th. The legislation would only allow the release of Wyoming National Guard units into active combat duty if there was a congressional declaration of war. Wow, very straightforward. Barring an attack on the U.S., you can't send the National Guard into combat duty unless there's a declaration of war. So this is getting a lot of support, at least in the state House and Senate. We'll see how it goes. It has to have an introductory vote in the next probably few days, sometime this week. So we'll be monitoring House Bill 98. The kind of granddaddy of that effort comes from West Virginia, where Delegate Pat McGeehan has been working really hard for a number of years to bring other states into this effort. We now see West Virginia, Wyoming, Michigan, House Bill 5320, Oklahoma, SB 1101, South Carolina, House Bill 4728, and Hawaii, House Bill 2168. But just last week or so, Pat, over in West Virginia, he was having trouble. Basically, the committee chair was saying, let me see if I can expand this so you're watching on video. The committee chair was basically not bringing the bill up, House Bill 2732. It had already passed a step in the State House last year, and this is a carryover session. So it had already moved a bit, and now a committee chair is basically saying, I'm going to stall. We're not even going to give it a hearing. So Pat went for a parliamentary move to basically withdraw it out of committee. And it failed by one vote. It was a vote of 50 to 50, basically to skip the committee and go straight to the House floor. And what ended up happening is, even though that failed to actually move forward, his maneuver brought a lot of attention, because this isn't a very common process. Maybe it happens more in West Virginia than elsewhere, but attempts to basically skip committee chairs who are refusing to even consider a hearing or a vote in their committee on a particular bill. Maybe they're a bad guy, maybe they're not, maybe they're busy with other stuff, maybe they're clueless, who knows, but for whatever reason, and it's not a common thing. So there was a lot of news coverage on it. A local newspaper started putting out a local poll on it. I think Meharry is going to be covering that as well. And then the Morgantown, I think it's the Dominion Post, actually published an editorial, and McGeehan sent this out, and I got a copy of it, at least a screenshot. Stop Congress from letting down Guard troops in our state. And basically they reported on this, on how his motion failed 50-50. But because of that, House Bill 2732 got so much attention that that committee chair in the Veterans Affairs and Homeland Security Committee has now committed to giving the bill a hearing at least. And from my understanding, they have the votes to actually get that out of committee. It might happen as soon as tomorrow, Tuesday, February 11th, but we'll keep an eye on that. Unfortunately, I don't have a link to this editorial. I just have a screenshot, but maybe I can find a way to actually upload this somewhere so you guys can read this as well. Anyways, I hope you guys found this really interesting. There's a lot of information to digest here. This is really just scratching the surface. We are literally monitoring like 300 to 400, maybe 500 pieces of legislation for this 2020 legislative session. At some point, we are going to have enough funding on hand to be able to report on all of it and send out action alerts for what you need to do to support each bill at each stage. For each piece of legislation, there's somewhere from 11 to 13 stages. First, it needs co-sponsors. Then once it gets co-sponsors, then it needs to get a committee hearing scheduled. Then once the hearing happens, then it needs to get passed out of committee. Then it goes to another committee. Then it goes to the House floor or the Senate floor, and it needs to have a first vote and then a second vote or a second vote and a third vote. And then it has to repeat the entire process with each of these steps in the other chamber, whether it's Senate or House. So it's a lot of phases. And when we're at full capacity here, what we like to do and what we've done sometimes in the past is we'll pick out some key pieces of legislation and email people in that particular state and say, look, this bill is in this committee. Here's the phone numbers and email addresses of everyone in that committee. Contact them today. We're not doing as much of that as we should, but I do have that in my vision for us as we expand our organization here at 10th Amendment Center. And again, if you like the show, you find it informational, you find it educational, you find it worthy of supporting, make sure to smash that like button. You can help us get to that next level by joining our membership program for as little as $2 a month. That's over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. And of course, if you are on YouTube, subscribe, get bell notifications. If you're on iTunes, leave a review, whatever it is. All of these platforms are very easily triggered, so all of these actions that you can take for absolutely free tells the platform to show the program to more and more people. Again, I hope you guys found this interesting and educational. I hope you're fired up to take action in support of at least something here. That means I've done at least a decent job. I hope you're having a great start to your week. I appreciate you spending some time with me, and I'll see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.